If there ever was an EV you could describe as toiling in obscurity, it would be the Kia Niro, and that's a real shame. I get that it's not all futuristic and flashy, and range is a little on the low side, but this has to go down as one of the most useful and user-friendly electric vehicles out there. If you're serious about making the switch to electrification, you've got to check this thing out. For more expert car reviews, don't forget to share our channel and subscribe so you can catch some of this and maybe even a little of that. Buyer apprehension being what it is, I'm not totally surprised that the Niro hasn't exactly taken off in the sales charts over the last few years, but I am just a little bit confused because, see, I remember a time where an electric vehicle like the Nissan Leaf or even a hybrid like the Toyota Prius was considered too quirky looking, and that kept people away. Now, obviously the designs had a lot to do with aerodynamics, and they still do in the case of those cars, but it was something that led to some apprehension. I had tons of conversations over the years with people who said, if only going green looked normal, I would consider doing it. So Kia delivered a pretty conventional looking crossover hatchback sort of thing, and the best part is, it's actually really good. You can get it with 3 different powertrains, a conventional hybrid, a plug-in hybrid, or this all-electric one I'm driving. But you know, tons of other electric cars entered the conversation before this thing, and that really is a shame because it is a very good car. Now, it does look like Kia is heading in that direction with the next gen Niro that should be out sometime next year, so we'll see how it does with a little bit more standout styling. But anyways, let's talk about one of the big reasons I think this thing is so good, and it's just how approachable it is. Now, I'm sure part of the appeal of a vehicle like the Tesla Model Y or the Ford Mustang Mach-E, that big central touchscreen where everything gets built into that head unit. But you know, I feel like something like this just makes more sense. There's still tons of tech in here. It's just not in your face. And best of all, you have tons of physical controls for both the HVAC and the infotainment systems. And that part is really great for that kind of get to know you period at the beginning, as well as in the long term. Who knows how those big touchscreens are going to hold up over, I don't know, 5-10 years, whereas something like this, it's a little more familiar and it's been in the mix for a long time. All these physical controls also mean that if that head unit dies, you can still adjust your climate control, whereas something where it's all centralized to the touchscreen, not so much. And then again, having these physical controls for the HVAC system is just way more convenient. I know you can use voice control with something like a Tesla, but it's nice to know that I can just reach down here and adjust the temperature or the fan speed, and I don't have to do anything else, and that means I can focus on the road ahead. Since this thing doesn't need a mechanical shift linkage, the gear selector is just kind of floating on the end of the console with this rotary knob. And even though that's not conventional, this just looks like any other car. If you didn't know this was an EV, you really wouldn't be able to tell by climbing inside. There's one little badge here on the end of the dashboard, but that is it. And then when we get back to this head unit, well, this is the only trim that comes with this 10.25-inch screen. This is the SX Touring. The other 2 trims, they come with an 8-inch unit, but they work basically the same way. They're both really responsive, and the infotainment interface itself is really good. All trims also include Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, satellite radio, and Kia's connected smartphone app. And that means you can lock and unlock the doors or adjust the climate control or even start your charging all from your smartphone. And that is really cool. The only thing that's different about this one, you also get built-in navigation. And usually I don't use that because I prefer using Google Maps, but this plots EV chargers along your route, and that is excellent. Now, if you can get yourself to a DC fast charger, Kia says it should take you right around an hour to get to 80%. And that does seem fairly accurate. I just hooked up to one. I pulled up and it was at 22%. I plugged in, it took exactly 60 minutes to get to 80%, and it gave me 300 kilometers of range. And when I got there, I only had about 110. That's not bad considering it's right around the freezing point today, and that is a big factor in those charge times. Now, if you hook up to a level 2, the kind of charger that you might get installed at home, It should take you about 10 hours to get a full charge. And don't forget, those times are ideal, right? So they don't factor in stuff like ambient temperature, state of charge, or even the very makeup of your battery. That is something very important to keep in mind, because even something like the Porsche Taycan isn't always going to hit those ideal charging numbers. I'm going to have another video about that stuff that you can go ahead and watch once you're done here. But even so, to do that in about an hour on a day like today isn't so bad. And now let's talk a bit about range. This is officially good for 385 kilometers, and that seems pretty accurate. That's what it said when I picked it up the other day. And when I got to that charger, well, I had done 278 kilometers and I had 110 kilometers left. You do the math. That's pretty close to 385. And again, up to 80%, and I was at 300 kilometers. So not bad. That puts it right in between the Nissan Leaf and the Chevy Bolt EV. But the problem I have is that it doesn't look all that good on paper, especially at a time where you have Teslas and Mustang Mach-E's that can go a good 500 kilometers between charges. And honestly, I don't know what the magic number is before more people will consider EVs, but I'd have to think it's got to be in that 500 to 600 kilometer mark, or maybe even more. My camera guy Will and I were talking about it this morning, and I think maybe something closer to 1,000 kilometers is that point where the average person might consider it. But this is obviously more than fine for even a long commute, and it's even better if you have access to charging at work as well as at home. So the Niro's consumption rate, which is how much energy it should burn while you're driving, is officially 18.6 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. It's about middle of the road in the EV market. There are a lot of vehicles out there that do a bit better. Comparable Teslas, or even the Hyundai Ioniq Electric that uses this same powertrain. It's down in the 15s, but that's not bad. And when I went on my drive the other day, I did about 200 kilometers and I managed 18.1, and that was in a bit of a snowstorm. So I am fairly impressed with how it performs. But now is a good time to point out something that might be a problem for some of you. This is front wheel drive only, no all wheel drive. And honestly, I do get the hang up, but at the same time, I wouldn't let it bug me too much, especially because with a good set of winter tires, which you definitely need, and this one has on it, you're not going to have any issues. It is very sure-footed, even in slippery conditions. Extra traction can be nice, but I don't think it's necessary. And I could get into a whole thing about traction versus grip, but trust me, it's not mandatory that you have all-wheel drive, even if you are driving on unplowed roads in the winter time. Now, something else I really like about the Niro EV, and something I think a lot of you out there will like too, especially if this is your first foray into electrification, is it really does drive like any other car. Now, of course, the sound isn't the same. That's a big one, and the acceleration too, but I'll get to that in a minute. But just the overall demeanor and how turnkey it is. You just get in and go. Like I said, you settle in. It doesn't feel like an electric vehicle. And you also don't have to worry about a really sensitive accelerator pedal or needing to hypermile to get the most out of it. It's just a very user-friendly car to drive. There's just no real learning curve to worry about, though there obviously are some differences, starting with all the extra weight down low in this car. I'm going to give you some context. That Forte 5 GT that I just reviewed not too long ago, and you can go ahead and watch that video once you're done here. Well, that thing, the footprint's about the same as this, and it weighs about 3,000 pounds. But this, 3,900 pounds. That's significant, and you can definitely feel it. Like I said, it's down low in the car. But the cool thing about the Niro is it drives more like its size and not its weight, if that makes sense. So it's really agile. Even though you can feel all that weight, it's not an anchor. It just feels really planted to the ground, and the handling is a genuine highlight. There's some actual feel between what's in your hands and which way the front wheels are pointing. And that's not just important for someone like me who appreciates the finer points of driving. It's nice in the event that you are making an evasive maneuver, that you know what is happening and which way the wheels are pointing. Trust me, you really want to take advantage of that in an emergency. And a big reason why this has an actual steering rack instead of a by-wire system is because this is the same platform as both the conventional and plug-in hybrid versions of the Niro, but I really like the way this thing drives. And then if we want to talk about some other differences, well, of course, there is that acceleration. Now, this thing has 291 pound-feet of torque, so it's not much compared to some other EVs out there, but it is a ton. And this thing can take off in a hurry if you want. Because don't forget, electric vehicles, you don't have to wait for a mechanical buildup of torque. It's like a dimmer switch. You just control how much you want. But again, the cool thing is you don't have to worry about it being really touchy. It's very easy to modulate the pedal and know exactly how much speed you're about to apply. That is key. And then something else that's different here, this does have regenerative brakes, and I like it because there are 3 different stages and you can choose how much regeneration you want or how little you want, depending on how you're feeling or if you have any passengers with you. I'd still recommend keeping some gravel in the glove box because anyone that's not used to it might feel a little motion sick, but it is really cool that you can use these paddles on the steering wheel to adjust the regeneration level. And that means that the electric motor will actually spin in reverse when you're slowing down to harvest that kinetic energy and put it into the battery pack. I have it on level 3 right now, and it's even possible for one pedal driving, although it won't quite come to a complete stop on its own. But all you have to do is hold down this pedal on the left-hand side of the steering wheel, and it'll bring you to a dead stop, and that is very cool. Anyway, even with that sharp handling or how responsive the throttle can be, this thing really is meant to be driven casually, and that's where the Niro EV really shines. It's really relaxed to drive. It's comfortable, although not quite as comfortable as you might think. There's definitely some rigidity here. It's not uncomfortable, it's just kind of stiff. The damping could use a little bit of a softer spring rate because some bumps and potholes, you can definitely feel them. They're almost, well, we're about to go over some train tracks here, and you're gonna see just how much the camera shakes, I think, because of how stiff it is. You can see me shifting around in my seat. All the rigidity with the battery pack underneath the car, that's the reason why you're gonna notice that. But again, it's not uncomfortable. It just doesn't quite float the way some electric cars do, but I like it for the most part. And then the other nice thing when it comes to comfort is because I'm in this SX Touring trim, I've got a heated steering wheel, heated and ventilated front seats. There's even heated seats in the back. So Will, he's enjoying himself on this chilly morning. The other thing you get with this SX Touring trim is all kinds of advanced safety features, though that is a bit of a disappointment in the sense that the other 2 trims get nothing. No blind spot monitoring, no forward collision warning, no lane keep assist. If you want any of that, including adaptive cruise, you have to go with this SX Touring. And it also has that lane follow function, but there's no need to worry about those micro corrections I just went through with the Kia Carnival. It is way smoother of a system. Not quite as good as Nissan's, but not far off either. And you know, that does make highway driving very nice. And again, just get in and go. I picked it up the other day. I was in that snowstorm. The snow cleared, and it was just very nice out on the highway. And I didn't feel like I really had to spend a ton of time getting comfortable with this car. I just kind of fit, and it made sense. And speaking of fitting, there is a ton of room in here considering the size of this thing. As you can see, even with this sunroof, I have more than enough headroom. Shoulder room is nice. There's tons of storage, and even the second row, a ton of legroom. The only issue is that it does feel like, because of that battery pack being underneath, well, the seat cushion sits pretty close to the floor, so when I'm back there, my knees are up near my chin. But it is nice to have all that room, and the same goes with cargo room. There's something like 640 liters or so behind the back seats and 1,800 when you fold them down, which is more than enough. The only disappointment is with the subwoofer that comes in this SX Touring, it is a little bit of a tight fit to get Patty the pedal car back there, but she does fit with just a little more work. I really have enjoyed my week with this Niro EV. It just sort of fits. It makes a lot of sense. I'm not so crazy about the range, but more so that it's not impressive to look at on paper. But honestly, it would work for me. And this is the kind of electric car that I would genuinely consider if I were in the market. The only thing I'm hung up on is the price, because if you look at this SX Touring trim I am driving, it's about 57 grand before tax, and that means it's 9,000 bucks more than the most expensive Nissan Leaf, and about the same as a decked out Chevy Bolt EUV. It's even in the same territory as a Ford Mustang Mach-E. That is a lot of money. Now, something it has in its favor is I think it's the only EV of its size, aside from the Hyundai Kona Electric, that shares everything with this that you can get with all those creature comforts I mentioned. Heated steering wheel, heated and ventilated front seats, heated rear seats, leather upholstery. That part is really cool, and it qualifies for the federal green rebate, which means knocking $5,000 off the purchase price or on a 4-year lease. But that still means you're looking at a $52,000 compact car. To recap, I like how user-friendly the Kia Niro EV is to drive, how spacious it is, and that it's full of all kinds of physical controls. I don't like how expensive it is, even when you factor in incentives, that the ride quality is maybe a little too firm, or that its range doesn't stand out. I think the Kia Niro EV is a tremendously underrated vehicle that doesn't get nearly enough credit for being as good as it actually is. It's got tons of tech, plenty of practicality, and decent driving range. Although I do think that last one needs to get better if this is going to appeal to a wider audience. It's also on the expensive side unless you live somewhere where you can combine that federal rebate with a provincial or territorial one to get the price of this top trim below that $50,000 mark. Either way, if you're in the market for a small EV that still feels like a car instead of a computer, I'd highly recommend taking one of these for a spin.